Today's headlines: Operation Bullfinch, no need to wait for legislation, Judge Andrew Vickers imposes a secret criminal court. The Euro debt time bomb ticks ever closer as the cost of insuring against the Spanish default skyrockets. And thousands protest in Galway as the Irish Labour Party hold its spring conference. Hello, it's Wednesday the 18th of April. I am Malcolm Massey and welcome to the New Look UK column news. Judge Andrew Vickers has imposed a secret court and issued a gagging order against the Oxford Mail and Oxford Times. A concerned Oxford resident has made the UK column aware that Operation Bullfinch, the police investigation into the Oxford paedophile ring, successfully called for District Judge Andrew Vickers to gag the two local newspapers. The Oxford Mail had been reporting the court case of a man who appeared in a separate court at the same time as the court appearance of 6 men accused of being part of the main child prostitution ring. In addition to the gagging order, the Mail reporter was required to leave the court hearing itself. The draconian measure of ejecting the reporter, rather than simply ordering him not to report proceedings, takes us even closer to secret courts where judges can do as they please. In a pithy article complaining of gagging, the Oxford Mail reported on 26th of March this year that District Judge Andrew Vickers prevented details of the hearing being reported unless the man is charged and appears at court. He passed rulings under the Contempt of Court Act to stop any publication and to prevent the man's name and address being revealed in connection with the hearing. This came after it was argued by police that any press report could hamper their investigation. But the judge then took the unusual step of holding the hearing in camera, which means press and public are excluded, forcing our reporter to leave the courtroom. He ruled the investigation could be jeopardised if the hearing was not held behind closed doors. Recognising that the police may well have a legitimate need to protect an ongoing investigation, Judge Vickers' statement and actions are nevertheless highly questionable, if not dangerous to open and accountable justice. By preventing details of the hearing being reported unless the man is charged and appears at court, the judge seems to have ignored the fact that the man was already in court. Furthermore, if he was already in court, why had he not already been charged? In imposing a closed court hearing and excluding the press and the public, Judge Vickers then presided over a secret court. What subsequently took place behind those closed court doors? Was the unknown man threatened, intimidated, or coerced in some way? The public has no way of knowing, yet this is the very Soviet injustice system that Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice Ken Clarke is promoting for sensitive government trials, inquests and inquiries. Meanwhile, the UK column continues to highlight the fact that, despite their good work in Operation Bullfinch, Thames Valley Police have still not formally interviewed or taken statements from any of the victims alleging sexual, physical and racial abuse and intimidation at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. Further questions are likely to emerge over the bias in police operations against child abusers in Oxford, as Thames Valley Police are key players in the same public child protection partnerships, which have clearly failed to protect young girls in their direct care. Such failings suggest malfeasance and misfeasance in public office, if not more serious charges. The euro crisis continues to build as the European debt bubble becomes ever more fragile. While most of the media focus has been on Greece, Spain has been building its status as the next big collapse. The cost of borrowing money from the markets has been yo-yoing around the 6% mark, as so-called market sentiment passes judgment on Spain's outlook. Yesterday, the market seemed to believe that Spain was a better bet than it has been, with the interest rates charged on its debt falling to 5.89%. Spain had planned to raise €3 billion in their bond auction, but managed to exceed expectations by raising €3.2 billion. Nonetheless, the situation remains grave. One good measure for how a nation is viewed by the financial markets is the cost of insuring against the non-repayment of government debt. This insurance is brought using a derivative called a credit default swap, and this week the cost of those rose to a record high. It now costs £500,000 to insure £10 million of Spanish debt over 5 years. It costs £70,000 to insure the same amount of German debt. Spain hasn't issued many longer-term bonds recently, which means that on average the time until their outstanding debt matures and has to be paid back is shortening, like a lit fuse. Even the mainstream media is giving recognition to the seriousness of the situation, with Liam Halligan warning in the Sunday Telegraph that the Spanish debt bomb is about to explode. The spectre of another Eurozone bailout looms large, only this time far bigger than Greece, involving much larger numbers and in one of the world's major economies. The point that neither Mr. Halligan nor his media colleagues will make is that it is the banks and the banking system which are the cause of the problem here. While Spain carries its huge budget deficit and weak economy, it is the Spanish banks that are the biggest cause for concern. Total borrowing for Spanish banks from the European Central Bank doubled in March compared to February, coming in at €316 billion. Spanish banks now account for nearly 30% of all European bank lending from the ECB. Until the banking system is placed in administration and its systemic debts reorganised, Europe and the world will be stuck in this cycle of debt piled upon debt, requiring bailout after bailout. Last Friday, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has attacked the European Union and the IMF for imposing political conditions on an EU-IMF loan desperately needed. Hungary asked for a 15 to 20 billion loan last November, but before they knew what was happening, they were warned that any more money would depend on proving their commitment to democratic principles. Viktor Orban's government has come in for criticism from the banking and political establishment since it enacted a series of laws and a new consultation which, the establishment says, curbs the Hungarian central bank's so-called independence. In other words, Hungary's leadership has quite sensibly put legislation in place which curtails the financial establishment's ability to asset strip the nation. As the pressure is built on Orban to amend his legislation, he has become more outspoken. In an interview last Friday, he said, "Creating political conditions, for example over the justice system, would amount to blackmail, which is unacceptable within the European Union." European nations are now expected to swallow the kinds of terms that African nations have had to deal with in the past, it seems. The Irish Labour Party, the Junior's partner in Ireland's coalition government, had their conference disrupted as several thousand protesters gathered outside the venue in Galway last Saturday to register their disgust at austerity measures being imposed by the Irish government and their Troika masters. Alternative media estimates of the number of people protesting range from 5,000 to 7,000. The Irish Times reported that there were 1,000 protesters. Placards read, "No way, we won't pay," and "Shame on you, Labour working class traitors." At one stage, about 100 protesters broke through the Garda barrier and staged a sit-down protest outside the front door of the conference venue. A tricolour-draped coffin with a Labour Party red rose on top was brought to the main entrance, and a copy of the conference agenda was burnt. The referendum on the European Fiscal Treaty is due to take place on the 31st of May. The last time a referendum on Europe was held, it took 2 goes to get the result the government wanted. That was at a time when the mood amongst the Irish public was good. Things have changed as austerity bites. We wonder how many times that will have to run this referendum, or will they go directly to the vote rigging? Conservative traitor Michael Heseltine told the BBC that Britain will join the EU if it survives. It is unclear if he meant the Euro or Britain. Heseltine gloated to the BBC that Britain had failed to resist European integration, and that while the Eurozone is in crisis, it is a very Eurosceptic view to see the Euro as a failed project. Heseltine is currently serving as advisor to the government on economic growth. If he is seriously advocating that Britain joins the Euro in the long term, it has to be assumed that he is in fact giving advice on the growth of Britain's obligations to banks. Film director, producer, actor and writer Sean Stone has made a short video calling for the impeachment of Barack Obama for his repeated crimes against both the American people and the rest of the world. This follows a resolution introduced in the House last month by North Carolina Republican Walter Jones. Resolution 107 confirms that, should the President use military force without the authorization of Congress, his actions would constitute an impeachable crime and misdemeanor. while citing compromising acts of war initiated by the Obama administration, such as the invasion of Libya, which was no threat to the US. Stone also suggests that Obama's facilitation of the bank and engineered bailout is another reason he should be impeached, that Obama's endeavours have only consolidated the private banks, making them more powerful and more profitable than they were before the financial crash, resulting in the American people being exposed to foreclosures and job losses, whilst tying them to a financial burden they themselves had not created, that Obama was proudly and publicly declared his interest in sidestepping Congress in making decisions and legislation, while at the same time creating bills that undermine the American people's liberty and threaten to take away private property and detain American civilians without trial for an unspecified time period. Stone says these actions have stretched the patience of many American people who have grown tired of the menacing behaviour of a man who declared, "Yes, we can," who now realise that the declaration was incomplete and should have contained, "Yes, we can take away your liberty." Alex Jones's Prison Planet has got behind Sean Stone's campaign and is calling for the American people to support the call for impeachment and let the renegade president face the scrutiny of the judiciary. The Tea Party Tribune in America has reported that the American government is proposing legislation that would see the revocation of passports should the passport holder fall behind with their taxes. They state, "There has been some inquiry about Senate Bill 1813, specifically the section giving the IRS power to revoke your passports. An amendment has been tacked onto a federal highway construction bill, Senate 1813, proposed by Democratic Senator Barbara Boxer, which included an amendment that would prevent an American citizen from leaving the country based upon a determination by the IRS that you owe the government back taxes." Financial advisor Clark Hodges says the measure is equally concerning when considering the amount of people it could affect. Talking to a mainstream media in America, he said, "There are so many people that fall into that situation, and I think that's too invasive. Especially coming out of a bad economy, there are a lot of people behind on a lot of things." The curiously named Moving Ahead in Progress in the 21st Century Act, or MAP 21 for short, has passed the Senate in a vote of 74 to 22 and is now headed for the House, and if it passes, will be enacted by the President. On the 6th of April, The Guardian published an article quoting Professor Jim Hansen, the head of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies, where Hansen likened man-made global warming to a great moral issue on a par with slavery. Hansen proposes dealing with this great moral issue using the mechanism of a global carbon tax imposed on energy use. Last week, 49 former NASA scientists issued a letter to NASA Administrator Charles Bolton. The letter said, "We, the undersigned, respectfully request that NASA and the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, or GISS, refrain from including unproven remarks in public releases and websites. We believe the claims by NASA and GISS that man-made carbon dioxide is having a catastrophic impact on global climate change are not substantiated, especially when considering thousands of years of empirical data. With hundreds of well-known climate scientists and tens of thousands of other scientists publicly declaring their disbelief in the catastrophic forecasts coming particularly from the GISS leadership, it is clear that the science is not settled." Naturally, the backlash in the blogosphere has been intense, mostly vitriolic abuse of the signatories themselves rather than what they have to say. The reaction was very similar in nature to that caused when 16 scientists from a range of institutions signed an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal in January. It seems the climate change cult does not want to engage in serious debate, preferring instead to attack. Monsanto, the American agricultural giant responsible for manufacturing Frankenstein products in the laboratory, has agreed to an out-of-court settlement of up to $93 million to residents of a small town in West Virginia for exposure to dioxins following accidents and general pollution at the herbicide plant in Nitro from 1929 to 1995. Dioxins are a group of highly toxic chemicals that have been linked to heart and liver disease, human reproductive disorders, and developmental problems. Dioxin is equally problematic to the environment, even in small doses, triggering the US government to list the chemical as a known human carcinogen. The class action suit came as a result of residents experiencing a long-lasting and disfiguring condition known as chloracne, as well as pains in their chest, legs, and abdomen. Following the start of the lawsuit, the Environmental Protection Agency conducted a criminal fraud investigation which discovered that Monsanto used a disaster at their nitro plant to manufacture evidence that dioxin exposure produced the skin condition called chloracne. However, the EPA then backed Monsanto's claims that neither they nor their use of dioxins were responsible for the levels of neurological side effects or cancer, such as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, apparent within the residents. This claim was repeatedly used by the EPA to deny help to those citizens exposed to the deadly chemical who did not exhibit the skin condition chloracne. The EPA's brief investigation, which was quickly abandoned, also discovered evidence that Monsanto knowingly contaminated Lysol with dioxins, even though the product was being marketed for cleaning baby toys. It was also discovered that the toxin had found its way into landfill, storm drains, streams, sewers, and into the air, as some of the waste was burned by the agricultural plant. Even though the operation has been abandoned for many years, dioxin can still be found in nearby streams, rivers, and fish. In 1990, Monsanto's behaviour caught the interest of Kate Jenkins, a PhD chemist at the EPA, who became convinced that Monsanto had deliberately manipulated the EPA studies of the victims of the nitro disaster. Jenkins wrote a memorandum in which she revealed that the basis of the EPA's investigation was a study by Raymond Susskind at the University of Cincinnati to determine that chloracne was the prime indicator of dioxin exposure and was in fact paid for by Monsanto. She also stated that unpublished findings by Susskind indicated this hypothesis was incorrect, and those workers who did not show signs of chloracne weren't even tested, making it impossible to detect other symptoms as a result of exposure. Jenkins was later harassed by both the EPA and Monsanto and had her duties withdrawn without warning until she was finally resigned in 1992 to a job that was primarily administrative. Dr. Jenkins filed a complaint with the Department of Labour, who investigated her claims and found in Jenkins' favour. The EPA appealed 3 times to the Secretary of Labour, but each time the department found in favour of Jenkins, finding that none of the rationales given by the EPA for her transfer appeared valid. In August of 1992, the EPA quietly closed the criminal investigation without ever publicly determining if Monsanto's study were valid or not, let alone fraudulent. Last Saturday, The Telegraph reported on a contest which was run by the National Army Museum to identify Britain's most outstanding military opponent. The final contest was held in front of an audience of 70 people, following a public vote to shortlist 5 finalists. In the end, the winner was George Washington, followed by Michael Collins, Napoleon Bonaparte, Erwin Rommel, and Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. There was a number of follow-up blog posts in the Telegraph website. One, however, stood out. A blog by Ed West entitled "George Washington wasn't Britain's greatest foe, but I know exactly who was." While Mr. West's blog was not really in the spirit of the original competition, in that his eventual candidate was not a military leader, we have to applaud his choice. To quote from the blog, "Step forward the Right Honourable Sir Edward Heath, KG-MBE. Washington, Rommel and Ataturk have nothing on him. As Cicero wrote, a nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within." Abu Qatada is back behind bars as part of a renewed bid to deport him to Jordan. Lambasted in the press as a hate cleric, firebrand and Osama bin Laden's right-hand man in Europe, Home Secretary admitted today that it could still be many months before he is removed, as he still has the right of appeal against these latest attempts to kick him out. So far, the Qatada case has cost the taxpayer £1.5 million in legal costs and benefits. In fact, Qatada began claiming benefits almost as soon as he arrived in the UK in 1993 on an illegal passport, even though he was wanted in the US, Europe and the Middle East on terrorism charges. In 2001, when the Anti-Terrorism Crime and Security Act became law, Qatada fled his home. French officials accused MI5 of helping him run. While he remained on the run, one intelligence chief in Paris was reported by The Independent as saying, "British intelligence is saying they don't know or don't have any idea where he is, but we know where he is, and if we know, I'm quite sure they do." Almost a year later, he was found hiding in a flat not far from Scotland Yard. In March 2005, The Times published an article entitled "Al-Qaeda Cleric Exposed as an MI5 Double Agent," in which they unsurprisingly reported that Qatada was working as a double agent for MI5. Following that article, European governments repeatedly asked arch-domestic terrorist Tony Blair to have him arrested, to no avail. Is the media's feigned disgust at government incompetence over this case therefore no more than a smokescreen to distract the public's attention away from the fact that the government is protecting their asset? I am Malcolm Massey, and this has been the UK Column News. Thank you for watching.